Many familiar faces. Our recording is kicking in, and we had well over 50 individuals register for today's conversation. So we'll continue to watch as our friends join the room. But since it's the top of the hour, let's get our party started. Welcome, everyone. I hope you are well. It's hard not to see your faces, but so fun to see so many familiar names on my screen. I'm Kathleen Scott. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of serving as the Vice President for Leadership Development and Partnerships at the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, also known as ASCU. I hope the sun is shining from wherever you are dialing in from. We know that this is the season that we all treasure as folks that are just passionate about higher ed. It's commencement season. The moments that are coming in front of us are when we get to celebrate our students and the families and the faculty and staff that helped our students reach this transformational milestone. So we hope you're all gearing up for what will be a successful commencement season. We're very grateful that you've taken a few minutes to be with, or 45 minutes to be with us this afternoon, away from your busy day to join us for this important conversation. Whether you're a president or a provost or a chair or student affairs leader or an athletic director, whoever you are on the campus and the institution, we all know that we're living through massive disruption across higher education, from financial pressures to public scrutiny, to workforce shifts, technology, opportunities, and disruptions. There are multiple forces that are reshaping higher ed's future. Today's discussion will be led by our thought partners and friends from EAB. Our host will walk us through these forces and share ideas on what leaders should be thinking about and doing. So leading the conversation and sharing EAB's most recent State of the Sector report will be Madinah Hamidullah, Director of Research Advisory Services. Throughout this session, you'll have an opportunity to share comments and questions in the chat. We won't have time for live Q&A, but we'll make sure that any questions get posed, get a follow-up. So go ahead and engage with us, and you can watch for an e-blast that will come after today's session with a recording and with a number of different resources that are referenced throughout today's conversation that you can share with colleagues or take back to investigate a little bit further. So with that, I am so pleased to welcome Madinah Hamidullah. Thank you for hosting us and for sharing this great information.
Thank you so much. Hopefully everybody's able to see the presentation. Thank you, Kathleen, for that warm introduction, kicking us off. I am so happy to be here with you today and sharing our most recent State of the Sector, as was mentioned in the opening. Before we get kicked off and to talk about all of the things that we see happening coming towards our sector, I want to start with a moment of a brief introduction. I want to introduce myself. I am, as Kathleen shared, I am Madinah Hamidullah. I'm a Director of Research Advisory Services at EAB, and I have the extreme pleasure of sharing with you today. I just want to share that prior to my time at EAB, I had the pleasure of being on a campus as both a professor and as an administrator, working with program redesign, working with accreditation, working with assessment, and bringing a lot of the amazing things that actually living the day-to-day of the things that we'll talk about today. I'm really excited to bring that work to the work that I do here at EAB and to share with you some of our best practice research and some of the things that are helping our organizations make bigger, bolder, and faster decisions. Along with my time on campus, I just did want to share that my time on campus was with two amazing member ASCU schools. So just really happy to be able to bring the work and the connection, the missions and the goals that often represent so many of the institutions that many of you are joining us with today. I want to share a little bit about EAB. At its core, EAB exists to help institutions make better, faster, and more confident decisions in an environment that's becoming more complex and more constrained every year. Our goal is to partner with colleges and universities to future-proof the institution. This is not just by solving today's problems, but by helping leaders anticipate what's coming next and act before challenges become crises. What you see on this slide is the full ecosystem of that work. EAB supports institutions across the entire student lifecycle and enterprise. This is from strategy and enrollment to advancement data and analytics, and student success. The common thread across all of these areas is insight-powered decision-making, using evidence, benchmarks, and proven practices to focus effort where it will have the greatest impact. Most directly, our state of the sector lives in the institutional strategy segment of this model. This is where leaders are making hard, high-stakes decisions about mission alignment, portfolio balance, and long-term sustainability. Also, within that segment of the wheel, you will find our strategic advisory services. These services start with really getting to know your institution. We combine that with a forward-looking analysis of trends across higher education and an understanding of the broader forces happening across the market to bring you expert support and services that meet you where you are and help you get where you want to go. The four major components here, which you'll see work in concert to create an ecosystem of support for driving better decisions and accelerating a positive change on campus. First, our best practice and future-focused research. This is partner-led, meaning our partners tell us their up-at-night issues, which is a major input crafting our research agenda. We combine that with our analysis of sector trends and knowledge of broader market forces to tell partners what they should have on their radar, but might not yet. Next up, we have our diagnostics and decision tools. These are intended to allow partners to quickly assess where they are and for our experts to plug into their process. Really meet them where they are to focus on the best practices that make the most sense for them. Next, we have our implementation and change management support. So here we move from assessing to activating. We provide unmetered access to our experts for advice, workshops, facilitated discussions, and more in order to galvanize change, move it forward, or unstick stuck process. And finally, we have our global peer-to-peer networking. One of the things that our partners appreciate the most is being able to convene with other leaders, learn from their experiences, and create meaningful communities of practice across important initiatives. So now that I've had a minute to share a little bit by myself and EAB, we're going to jump right in and we're going to start talking about our state of the sector and understanding how we make sense of all the things that have been happening in our sector of higher education broadly. We'll do this in a way that's actually useful for leaders. As we move along, feel free to drop any reactions or comments in the chat. We may not have time for full questions, as Kathleen mentioned, but our EAB colleagues, we're looking out for the areas where we might need additional information. We will also be sharing the information with you today. At EAB, we've been framing this moment as upheaval on four fronts, four distinct but deeply connected areas where pressure is intensifying. The first three represent what we call sector headwinds, and these are forces largely outside of any one institution's control. We have external accountability. This reflects the changing political and public expectations facing higher education. Financial sustainability. That captures the strain on the business model from both the revenue and cost pressures. Then our last sector headwind is market relevance, and that focuses on shifting student demand and a labor market being reshaped by technology. The final front is institutional agility, and it's about campus readiness. This is where leadership, governance, culture, and execution come into play, and where institutions have the greatest opportunity to respond proactively. As we get ourselves started today, as I mentioned, I want to welcome everybody that was able to comment in the chat. Just want to hear from you and find out which sector headwind represents the most pressing challenges for your institution. You can drop a number, you can drop a word, whatever you feel free to put that in the chat as we keep moving forward. And don't worry, they'll be on the next slide as well, so you'll be able to see them again. We're going to begin by talking about external accountability and how expectations of higher education are being rewritten. Given how much framing matters here, we want to examine the current administration's policies through two key lenses. First, politics and power. What we're seeing is an ideological spotlight with institutions and leaders being called out directly in culture war conflicts. There's also coercive scrutiny, where the threat of investigations or funding cuts. This is being used to enforce conformity. Next, we see a rewritten social contract. Federal support now comes with sharper strings attached around cost, outcomes, and even value alignment. And finally, regulatory mechanisms are being used to are being used more overtly to define what counts as quality or compliance, shifting authority away from campuses. On the next side, we have our dollars and cents. And these are the levers that are equally powerful. The administration is clearly seeking a better return on its investment in higher education. Most immediately, federal aid redesigns, from Pell Grant changes to new loan caps, these are reshaping both student demand and institutional revenue. International volatility, this comes from visa restrictions to geopolitical shocks. It's disrupting pipelines of students and research funding. Research dollars are being redirected towards more narrow priorities, destabilizing labs and long-term projects. And all of this is compounded by a state fiscal squeeze as federal tax and spending choices tighten state higher education budget. We're going to start by unpacking the politics and power dynamics first. Then we'll turn to the dollars and cents implications in our financial sustainability. When institutions come under fire from politics and power, it's tempting to see only two options here, and that's either to give in or push back. But in practice, we see four common approaches: blending in, giving in, pushing back, or reforming. Each approach carries risk. Blending in lowers the temperature, but it seeds the narrative. It's ceding ground, buys short-term peace, but it erodes autonomy. Pushing back often rallies internal support, but also invites further targeting. Reform can insulate you, but it also invites criticism and charges of complicity, often from internal stakeholders. Our key point here is that savvy leaders rarely just choose one. They might sequence and combine these approaches, blending in on some issues while reforming on others, seeding where the stakes are lower, but pushing back where core values are at risk. You can see some of this in the example on the slide. The question for each campus is which combination of response aligns with your context, your community, and your mission? And do you have the resolve and the backing to stick with it when accountability pressures present themselves? To really understand why these accountability pressures have traction, we have to look inward at the vulnerabilities they're exposing. At our best, higher education is anchored in a clear social mandate. Those are the items shown across the top of this slide: expanding access, driving mobility, strengthening economies, and advancing knowledge. Those goals are still widely supported, but this moment has resurfaced long-standing critiques about whether we're consistently delivering on that promise. So some of these concerns are bipartisan: completion rates, affordability, workforce alignment. For example, about 40% of students who start college never finish. So that's just not a talking point, that's an outcome gap. Others are more polarized. Questions about research relevance, accountability systems, and the growing cultural disconnect between institutions and the public. These critiques didn't start today, but they do make the sector more vulnerable to political pressure and public skepticism. So the task in front of us isn't to dismiss them, it's to reduce our exposure. That often means closing real gaps in outcomes, improving transparency, and reinforcing the value of what we deliver. Because many of the critics still believe in higher education's mission, they're just not always convinced we're delivering it consistently. And that's the accountability environment institutions are operating in right now. So here's a big question. If external pressures on higher education aren't going away, and it's unlikely that they'll magically disappear, what does a positive agenda look like for our sector? And how do we win back broad, lasting public support that outlives the next election cycle? Based on our analysis and conversations, we see three building blocks of what could potentially be higher education's winning platform for 2028. You'll also see on this slide that each goal comes with a few key performance indicators. First, powering jobs. reaffirming higher education as the fastest and most reliable route to good jobs, jobs that sustain families and keep America globally competitive. Next would be modeling civic literacy and open debate by fostering civic pluralism. Campuses should be the national example for respectful dialogue and civic engagement. We need to get people talking to each other in person again, not just kind of shouting at each other, past each other online. And third, advancing national resilience, putting higher education at the center of the country's leadership in defense, health, and critical infrastructure. And remember, national resilience starts with regional resilience. That means showing visibly and consistently that our institutions are committed to the communities that we serve. And tying all of this together is transparency and accountability. Whatever we do, it can't happen in the dark. We have to show the public that we're holding ourselves to the same standards that we are asking of others. So in that first section, we focused on how expectations of higher education are changing politically, publicly, and structurally. What's important to recognize is that those accountability pressures, they don't stop at governance or compliance. They show up very quickly and very concretely in institutional finances. So as we turn to our next front, financial sustainability, we're shifting from why the pressure exists to how it's impacting that business model and what leaders are being forced to confront as a result. As we shift into financial sustainability, it's important to name what's different about this moment. Institutions aren't just facing isolated pressures. They're facing them all at once. Every major revenue and expense category is under strain, and that's what we mean by synchronized compression. And higher education's model was built to absorb occasional shocks, a dip in tuition, a temporary funding cut, but it wasn't built for simultaneous pressure across labor, enrollment, research, auxiliaries, you name it. Some of this is longstanding, like demographic decline, and some of this is tied to shifting economic and labor demands. But a little bit of this is driven by recent policy changes. And those policy shifts matter for two reasons. One, they touch on nearly every part of the model, and they mark a break from the past. So in prior crises, the federal policy often stabilized institutions. Today, it's often adding to the strain. So the takeaway isn't that any one line is broken, it's that the entire system is operating under sustained compression. And that fundamentally changes the decisions leaders have to make. So once we see that, the next question is, where do we actually have room to maneuver? And as we continue to think about this, I want you to think about how this is showing up on your own campuses. So what really makes it hard for institutions to adapt when state appropriations change is the fact that our cost base is largely fixed. 56% of all institutional expenses are labor, and almost half of that is tied to instruction. And historically, higher education's worked really hard not to touch labor, especially that instruction side, because it's so core to the mission and stability and ability to serve our students. Most institutions today have pulled many of the levers that are available to them and are still facing significant structural deficits. So that's forcing schools to approach cost management and discipline differently. We're also seeing three big shifts here in the recent years. Prestige is no longer a shield. Even strong and presumably well-resourced institutions must make trade-offs. Academic labor is fair game. Instructional costs are now under the microscope. And this is because instruction is such a large cost driver. Institutions are looking more closely at how teaching is structured and not just how much is being spent. And then the legislation of productivity. External pressures are now shaping our internal decisions. So we can expect growing influence from the states on how institutions define productivity. And that's often going to be tied to student outcomes and workforce needs. So we're going to shift a little bit here. We've discussed about the cost side. Now let's talk about some of our largest revenue areas. That's enrollment. And we're going to start with looking at the pipeline. Here we see our Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education data, and this is on the projected percent change in the number of high school graduates from 2023 to 2041. Blue signals a decline, with the darkest blue indicating the greatest drops. Now you can see blue across most of the country, but there are some states that are especially hard hit with this. Our teal signals growth. So these are states with more favorable demographic conditions, and those are mostly concentrated into areas, the northern mountain and plains, and then in the southeast. Our big takeaway here is that overall, there'll be a smaller pool of high school grads for institutions to recruit. But we do know that those effects will be uneven. But what we're seeing though is that we're also seeing declining college rates attached to this. So when we look at the number of students that are graduating high school and then look at the number of students going to college, we see an interesting dynamic developing. Here we have some data from the American Community Survey. We looked at high school graduation rates and college going rates over time. 2012 is our baseline. So our graph shows the percent change. And what's striking here is that high school graduation has continued to go up. It's about at 91% across the United States. So we built a system where we get almost our entire population through high school. But at the same time, over the same time period, we've seen an almost 9% drop in college enrollment. So in 2023, college going was about 68%, and that's down from 75% back in 2012. So this is a double whammy. We have and will have even fewer high school graduates going forward, and then fewer of them are opting to enroll in college. So any hope of making up for demographic losses with increased college going isn't looking that promising. Our other dynamic increasingly at play here is around gender. Male college going rates have dropped more than women's. And this is what we mean by non-consumption coming to higher education. It's not just the competition for students, but a growing number of students are opting out of college altogether. And this shift in demand fundamentally changes the economics of enrollment growth. So if we think about this, if the pool of students is tightening, growth is actually not disappearing, it's concentrating. So over the past decade, we've identified 5 groups of institutions that have consistently grown despite demographic and affordability headwinds. We're looking from 2010 to 2023, and then we're looking at the percent change of their enrollment. First, we have online giants. These are institutions with over 10,000 students and more than 75% of their enrollment online. You can think of a Western Governors, Southern New Hampshire. And since 2010, this group has grown total enrollment by nearly 50%. It's the fastest of any segment. Second, we have what we call our Ivy Plus. The Ivy League, along with institutions like Stanford, MIT, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Chicago. They've grown by about 21% over the same time period. Third, we have our large selective private institutions, national brands with scale and strong admissions demand. So they're up about 16%. If you think about it, NYU, University of Southern California, Boston University. Fourth, we have our large urban publics, institutions embedded in major cities, often with strong professional and applied programs. They've grown by about roughly 14%, as have our state flagships. They've grown by about 14% as well. You will see that there are 54 in that state flagship group. I promise we can count. There are just a couple of states, Texas, California, Virginia, and New York, that have dual flagships. So that's why that number is there. Now, here's the bigger point. When we compare these 5 growth groups to all other 4-year institutions, the rest of the sector collectively declined by nearly 6%. And in terms of market share, those 175 institutions now enroll 46% of all 4-year students. And that's up from 40% in 2010. So this is not just a growth story. It's a concentration story, that nearly half of the market is now held by a relatively small group of institutions. Now, those 5 growth groups explain most of the market concentration story, but they're not the only institutions that are growing. While growth has concentrated among many of those large-scale players that we just talked about, there are individual regional publics that have grown dramatically over the past decade. And their strategies are worth unpacking because they're often ones that we can learn from and implement. So if you look at the chart at the bottom, the percentage growth among these regional institutions is striking, and they don't fit into any of the categories that we just talked about. Yet they have significantly expanded their enrollment. And when you study what they've done, we see some consistent themes emerge. First, many of them leverage place. Institutions like Nevada State University, California State University, San Marcos, they benefit from proximity to major metros without being as constrained by housing costs and capacity limits. They position themselves as accessible and affordable alternatives. Second, several have scaled online and flexible pathways. The University of Washington Bothell shares a campus with a 2-year institution. This creates a seamless transfer pathway. Others have invested early in online expansion to reach beyond their immediate geography. Next, and this is critical, many of their program portfolios skew towards applied workforce aligned programs. So for example, the University of Hawaii West Oahu, it's invested in hospitality, food systems, cybersecurity, and all of that is tied directly to their regional demand. Next, they've branded around value and regional relevance. Louisiana State University Shreveport's messaging, prestigious degree at affordable price, stay close, go far. It's a strong example of positioning around affordability and access. And finally, many have doubled down on serving overlooked or underserved populations. If you take Georgia Gwinnett College, it's a powerful example of this. It's an institution deeply rooted and deeply anchored in its county, serving a large first-generation population and underrepresented students. And it ties its mission directly to local workforce outcomes. Our broader takeaway here is that for regional publics, you want to focus on place, understand your region's workforce and economic needs, and offer practical and aligned programs. You may not have the same national brand as some of the institutions that we talked about on the previous slide, but we do know that you can win on relevance, you can win on accessibility, and you can win on value. I want to give you another chance just in case. Yes, thank you for those comments in the chat. I want to give you another chance just in case you're able to interact with us. Which represents the greatest opportunity for your institution, for those of you that are on the line? And also, I want to special note that many of those institutions that we just used as our examples, they are also ASCII member schools. So we're really happy to be able to highlight that. So whenever you get a chance, which, if any of these are your greatest opportunities, you can drop a number, you can drop a word, you can drop whatever you feel is appropriate in that chat. Is that leveraging favorable geography, scaling access, whether that's online or flexible pathways, expanding applied workforce, applied programs, branding around value and regional relevance, or targeting overlooked and underserved markets? Thanks, I see a couple options on there. As I mentioned in the beginning of our time together, while we are sharing these fronts separately, they are each deeply connected. Financial sustainability and external accountability doesn't exist in isolation. They intersect directly with what students value and what the labor market rewards. And so this essentially means that even if institutions stabilize their budgets, if all of that political commentary went away, we would still have lingering questions. And that is, are we preparing students for a labor market that is being itself transformed? So as we move into market relevance, we're shifting from institutional economics to student economics. And the question here is not just, can we afford to operate? But it's, are we delivering value in a labor market that looks very different than it did even 5 years ago? Before we talk about the labor market, let's talk a little bit about the students entering it. We won't be able to talk about that without talking about Gen Z. Gen Z, the generation, there are traditional college-age students right now. They're moving through our institutions and into the job market. They are born in a world of smartphones, social media, and now AI. And they're experiencing delayed milestones like financial independence, home ownership. And at the same time, this is along with rising social isolation and growing economic pessimism. And at the same time, technology is transforming and reshaping how they connect, how they learn, and even how they see the future. So this is the cohort we're preparing for, an increasingly automated and AI-driven workforce. That brings us to the second part of the story. It's the labor market that they're entering. The long-term value of a degree is still strong. The wage premium remains at a near historic high, but the early career pathway is becoming much less predictable. Recent graduates are facing higher underemployment, with more than half starting in roles that don't require a degree and many staying in those long term. And unemployment rates for grads is also starting to resemble those without degrees. So at the same time, we're seeing an unusual economic moment where growth is up, but job openings are down. And early signals suggest that AI is beginning to disrupt entry level knowledge work, the very roles that have traditionally served and launched careers. So while higher education still delivers long term value, the path from degree to career is narrowing. And ultimately, what this means is simple. It's that our traditional model of career access and progression is being fundamentally restructured. Historically, the labor market worked like a pyramid. Lots of entry-level roles, fewer mid-level, and then very few at the top. That structure assumed that employers would train early career talent and that the graduates could grow in roles over time. So what we're seeing though is that AI is compressing the base of that pyramid. Routine entry level work, both on our generalist side and our technical side, is increasingly becoming automated and augmented by technology. And it means that we have fewer traditional on ramps into the workforce. The result is a shift from that pyramid to what we see here is that diamond with fewer points of entry and much higher expectations to start. Entry level jobs are no longer learning roles, they're proving grounds. They're more competitive, more selective, and increasingly reserved for candidates who can deliver value on day one. So access to opportunity isn't disappearing, but it is becoming more gated. And that raises the bar for how we prepare our students to enter the workforce. AI is also rapidly reshaping the job search itself, and not in a way that's helping either side. Students can now mass apply with ease. 61% of Gen Z are submitting 100 plus applications, and LinkedIn sees about 11,000 applications per minute. At the same time, employers are using AI to sort through the volume and facing a rise in fake or low quality applications. So increasingly what we find in the job search is AI talking to AI, and both students and recruiters are being left frustrated. And that's why relationships are becoming more valuable, not less. Referrals already dramatically outperform cold applications, and employers are leaning more on trusted networks to find verified talent. And this is where higher education has a growing and differentiated role. While skills and credentials risk becoming commoditized, institutions can do something much harder to replicate. And that is that they could be the ones to build the trusted connections between students and employers, especially as entry level hiring contracts and becomes more regional. Colleges and universities can serve as that bridge, anchoring students to the real opportunities through relationships and not just applications. And so we're moving into finishing up our market relevance, moving into our final front. And what we know is that we've diagnosed the pressures. Our final question is whether institutions can adapt fast enough to meet them. That's what institutional agility is. Not just knowing what needs to change, but actually being able to change it. And this is where things get a bit more complicated because everything that we've just discussed hinges on people. We know we're a people enterprise, and real change only happens when mindsets shift and behaviors follow. Too often, efforts are simply fail because the human dimension gets overlooked. And right now is a particularly difficult time to lead change within this industry. On one side, we have all of those financial and market pressures that we've been discussing. These are increasing the urgency and forcing leaders to make bigger, bolder, faster changes than ever before. In many cases, change simply isn't optional anymore. But at the same time, our campuses are tired, morale is low, faculty and staff are craving stability after years of swirl. So that means leadership teams are caught in the middle. They're being pushed towards transformation by boards, legislatures, and the public while being pulled towards preservation by their own communities of faculty and staff. And students are also in that mix. Understandably, it's easy to swing too far to one side, to push change aggressively, but neglect the people dimension, or to over-index on preserving stability in order to protect morale. The better path lies in between those extremes. Leaders need to be candid about circumstances, not sugarcoating tough truths, but also intentional about investing in structures, process, cultural norms, and incentives that will give faculty and staff capacity to succeed. Because in the end, institutional agility and long-term success is going to depend on the strength of our people. In order to do that, we see 6 core capabilities that will separate institutions that thrive from those that struggle. I'll introduce each one briefly here. We have 4 operating capabilities and 2 endurance capabilities. Starting with our operating capabilities, decision resolve, the ability to make smart decisions quickly, not abandoning collaboration, but moving faster with clearer ownership and timeliness. Unapologetic focus. That's, are we willing to stop doing some things so that you can do the right things well? In a constrained environment, focus requires real trade-offs. Next, we have our portfolio logic. And this is managing programs and investments as a true portfolio, regularly assessing what's working, what's not, and reallocating resources accordingly. Fourth, we have our change-ready systems, ensuring our structures, our culture, and our processes actually enable innovation, not unintentionally slow or block it. For our endurance capabilities, we're going to start with urgent long-termism. That phrase might sound a little contradictory, but that's our point. Institutions must act with urgency today while making decisions that position the institution for long-term success. And finally, we have our executive resilience. Even the best long-term strategies fail if they can't survive leadership turnover. So this is essentially building strategies and systems that can withstand the turnover and maintain momentum over time. We have some supplemental materials that will help you work on all of this at your institutions. But at a very broad level, these are the capabilities that we see defining the next generation of successful institutions. All of these capabilities matter, but ultimately they rest on something even more fundamental, and that's leadership. And leadership is, especially in this moment, is action amid ambiguity. We've entered an era of hard decisions. There are no easy choices in this environment, and every path comes with trade-offs. And most of the choices leaders need to make to secure their institution's long-term success will prompt resistance, anxiety, and pushback. But that's the job, to lead amid ambiguity, turnover, and headwinds. If we focus only on what's easiest, cheapest, or most palpable in the moment, we ultimately do a disservice to our institutions. So instead, we need to center ourselves on what is right, the decisions that serve the mission and secure our future. And that's what this quote from Father Hesburgh captures so well. Don't ask what is easy or popular or least expensive. Ask what is right, and then do it, no matter how difficult, how costly, or unpopular, because in the long run, even those who disagree in the moment will respect leaders for acting with conviction and for doing what they believed was right. As we come to an end of our time together, I want to make sure that you have a couple resources to help you in your decision-making process. We're going to leave you with a practical takeaway and send these will all be sent to you in follow-up, send you with some information that our EAB partners, for example, have access to. And this is EAB's 6 attributes of agile institutions. It's a diagnostic, and it's a simple tool that can help you and your campus partners assess how consistently key leadership capabilities are showing up in practice. This handles decision-making to change execution, also to long-term resilience. It's a useful conversation starter, helping leaders assess where their institution is strong, where they might be a little vulnerable, and where agility investments will matter most. And from this tool, we'll also share links to our full suite of resources for our EAB.com State of the Sector. Here, you can download the research report. You can join our front by front webinar series. We have condensed for you today in about 40 minutes what was originally shared over a 2-day span. So there's lots of information on each one of these fronts that we go into deeper on our front by front webinar series. There you can also download additional resources, and we'll also share how you can get in touch with EAB. I am so grateful for our time together and to be able to share with you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen. Yeah.
Okey doke.
And we got you, Kathleen.
You got me. Um, I was just commenting how much I appreciated that you closed with a Father Hesburgh quote. It left me with hope in hard times, with that
Mhm.
kind of reflection on that leader that was so instrumental in higher education. As part of our follow-up materials, I'll make sure that we include a link. There was a documentary done on Father Hesburgh a couple of years ago and his impact on higher education and
Okay,
transformation.
great.
Anyway, so I think that will be
Wonderful.
maybe interesting to our attendees today. I loved hearing well, I found it fascinating when you asked the question, if we look at the chat around the challenges, there
Mhm.
was complete consensus around the biggest challenge, the biggest headwind from our attendees today, and that was around the financial crisis or the
Financial.
financial challenges. And yet, the opportunities, we have a wide variety of different responses in terms of how we seize the moment and what we can do and what we can leverage to address some of the headwinds. So, really
Yeah.
fascinating response from a diverse group of university leaders. I think it would be interesting for some of our attendees to take the report, download it,
Mhm.
and have conversation, particularly around the institutional agility and
Yes.
what can be done. How do we respond? What is our proactive response to this? So, lots of takeaways as we tackle these tough challenges. I want to
For
thank you,
sure.
Medina, for your time today, for putting together a wonderful presentation. Thank all of our attendees for joining us. You'll have more opportunities at our upcoming meeting, our summer meeting for academic and student affairs leaders planned in New Orleans. EAB and 20 of our other thought partners will be with us sharing their
Yes.
resources and information. We have other ways that we hope that our Ask You community will continue to engage with us, additional virtual opportunities coming up in the coming weeks. And we just want to wrap with a thank you to all of our Ask You participants, a thank you to EAB, and wish everybody a happy commencement season as you celebrate the power, the transformation of higher education and this important milestone for our students and their families. We wish all of our students best and thank all of the leaders in the room today for being with us and for all the work that you do.
Thank you so much. Take
Thanks,
care.
Medina. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.